There's a lot of song. Okay. So we have two source sheets for those who like source sheets. We have the curriculum, and so this is a flexible curriculum. So that's why I printed it, because what I want, this is kind of different ideas of what I thought would be great to talk about, different fun ideas of stuff I've taught in the past and that I was excited. But if there's another topic that you really like, you could write on the list, okay? You could write your own ideas, and I'll look through it, and maybe we'll do research. If you really hate that topic, you could also tell me and say, no, don't do that topic. We already heard a share about that one. So, but I'll just run through it real quick, since this is kind of like the beginning of our journey. The goals of the class, Emunah defined. We spoke about that last week. Thank you. Torah predictions fulfilled. So that's going to be today's class. And probably next week's also class. It's a big topic, a lot of fun stuff to talk about.
Once a week, your class?
The plan is for it to be on Wednesdays. Either Wednesdays at 11, once a week. Near-death experiences, miracles of modern history, shkacha pratis, stories, dreams, Emunah built into our souls, reincarnation, Rabbi predictions, the power of prayer, Bible codes, the Sinai proof, Talmudic knowledge, the argument from design. I already did the Sinai proof. Profundity of Torah. And then at the end, if we have time, who knows, the big questions on Emunah, bad stuff happening to good people, Torah and science, archaeology, Christianity, but I just don't feel it, and Amalek, Mamzers, homosexuality. So those are some topics that came to my head when I thought of important topics to talk about in this being Mechazik Our Emunah seminar. Sounds good? Okay. So afterwards, if anybody wants, not all of them today, but Bezrat Hashem. And again, if you have any specific topics that you really want, as we evolve, I'm happy to take questions from the Hebrew. Okay, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to dedicate our Torah study to be for the Shmira of all of Am Yisrael, the Miuchad, the Chayalim, and for the Shmira of all the Chatufim, and just for all of Am Yisrael, to bring Shefa and Bracha over everyone. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so last time, this is part 2. We spoke about how there's different pathways to Emunah, and we tried to define what Emunah was. We talked about how Emunah is being true to our inner values, and how while this course is going to be embarking on the intellectual path to try to connect to Hashem through our brains, there's also the emotional path through song, through music, through other venues to connect our neshama to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And with that said, we're going to be trying our best to not exactly prove, but to give evidence for the veracity of Torah and mitzvos using our brains, okay? And if nothing else, even if we don't succeed, just the hishtadlus of trying to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the intellect, hopefully Hashem will open us up to Emunah in that act of hishtadlus. Sounds good? Mm-hmm. Amazing. Okay. So, in today's class, and maybe next week too, what I wanted to take is a few predictions that I think the Torah gives, and try to ask ourselves, what are the odds that that would happen? And then to ask, did that actually happen? I'd like to start with a little mashal, okay? So imagine, I'm walking down, Tzemach is walking down the street, right after the shir. And he goes to the bus stop, okay? And a lady walks up to him and says, Tzemach, take my book. Shalom, shalom. Take my book. This is the key to life. If you read this book, you will have a happy life in this world and the next. So what's Tzemach probably going to do? He's probably going to run away, like go to the other bus stop, right? Because he's lots of crazy ladies in Yerushalayim. But somehow Tzemach's a nice guy. And he says, you know what? Okay, interesting. Give me some proof that there's veracity to this book of how to live a good life. So he says, listen, if you listen to me, it's all going to be amazing. It's going to be full of blessing. But if you don't listen to me, take this envelope and the following things are going to happen to you. Okay? The first thing that's going to happen to you is exactly at this time, tomorrow, at 12:07, 3 bicyclers are going to ride past you while you're waiting at the bus stop. Then the next day when you're at the bus stop, you're going to get on the bus and you're going to slip and hurt your left pinky toe. And then the next day, you're going to be walking in the shuk, and exactly at 1:14, you're going to lose your wallet. And Semach, of course, thinks this is a nutcase. He just moves on with his life. He thought that was an entertaining moment. He goes on with his life. And lo and behold, at the end of the week, he remembers that lady, and he looks back and he says, oh my God, that's exactly what happened. The red bikers, and then the stubbing my toe, and then losing my wallet. Exactly what that lady predicted is exactly what happened if I didn't listen to her. So is Semach gonna maybe consider, maybe wonder, hey, maybe there's some veracity, maybe there's some truth to this book that this lady has given, okay? So I think the mashal and the nimshal are pretty clear here. If we can indicate that the predictions that the Torah has given us are very unlikely, not just random general things, like you can go on the bus and you'll see some people, that's general. Specific things, and they happen despite the fact that they're unlikely, wow, that could be an indication that there's truth to this book that has been given to us. Okay, so that's what the plan is, Bezrat Hashem. So, let me just whip out my source sheet for 1 second. You guys have the source sheets? If you don't have the source sheets, I have some extra source sheets. You can scribble on them, that's what source sheets are for when you're bored. At least with my younger students. And 1 second. Let us begin. Okay, so I'm going to begin our shiur with a bit of a surprising place. It's a sad part of the Torah. We're going to begin with the tochacha. Okay, there's two tochachot. There's a tochacha in Vayikra, and there's the rebuke that God tells the Jewish people in Devarim Perek Chaf Ches. And we're going to see that many of the predictions that were predicted in the tochacha are highly unlikely, and yet they have been fulfilled. So let's go through it. So we don't have time to go through the whole tochacha. The basic idea is in Shoresh Bet, if you don't listen to the voice of the Lord Almighty, all of these curses are going to happen. A lot of bad things are going to happen. Now, most of those curses are very general. Things like your land is going to be vanquished and you're going to be conquered and there's going to be terrible sadness, etc., etc. But those are very general things. And therefore, we're not going to focus on those things in this shiur. Because, again, if the author of the Torah would say general things and they happen, it's not so surprising. Most nations at one point or the other are going to be conquered by other nations, and generally sad things are going to happen, so that's not going to prove anything. But if the author of the Torah writes something that is unlikely, that's what we're going to focus in on. Okay, one important preface. For us believing Jews, the Torah was given at Har Sinai by Moshe Rabbeinu 3,000 plus years ago. For those who don't believe in the veracity of Torah, I'm talking about biblical scholars, the latest they're going to bring it back would be around the time of the either Assyrian or Babylonian exile. Okay? Nobody claims that the Bible was written after the Roman exile. Okay? We're talking the latest they would claim would be after the first temple was destroyed. No one's going to say it's before that. So if we can have a prediction, before the second temple was destroyed, and then that happens later in our history, then everyone, even the most scholarly heretic in the world, would have to agree that that's unlikely. Because that's an important point. Okay? We believe it happened way before. But even a scholar would say, wow, it was predicted way before all of these things happened. Okay? So the Torah tells us in Chavches Samach Gimel Samach Dalet, Vaya, Kasher sas Hashem lachem la'tiv etchem la'arbot etchem ken yasis Hashem lachem la'avid etchem la'ashmid etchem nisach lem al adma asher tav Hashem l'rishta. If you don't do the Torah, God's going to destroy you, and you're going to be knocked out from the land which I have given to give you inheritance. Ve'efitz Hashem bechol amim mikseh haaretz v'ad kseh haaretz, and you're going to be scattered throughout the world. If you don't fulfill the Torah in the covenant, God says you're going to be destroyed and you're going to be scattered throughout the world. Okay? And you're going to worship all of these gods which you and your forefathers have not known. Okay. So the question is, what is the likelihood of a nation being decimated, being destroyed? Start with that. Do you think that's likely or unlikely? I would say not that unlikely. It could happen. It could happen that a prophet's going to say, well, one day you're going to get destroyed. The truth is, it didn't always happen. Okay? Many times, actually most of the time, nations would not destroy completely, like is described in the Torah, but rather tax them heavily. They wouldn't burn the place down. They would take for their tax base. For example, the Romans only twice in their entire history destroyed and exiled a conquered people, with us and with Carthage. But most of the time, there are many conquered Roman nations, they would just keep them, maybe enslave some of the hard workers and some of the women, but for the most part, they would leave them be and tax them, and as long as they submitted themselves. So it's a bit surprising, but I wouldn't say such a big deal that the Torah would predict that we would be conquered. But what I do think is interesting and very confusing is that you're going to get scattered. You're going to get scattered throughout the entire world. You, the Jewish people, the Torah predicts, is going to be scattered throughout the world. Yes, Dan?
What was the first thing? The first thing was being destroyed.
Destroyed. That you're going to be... And then, not completely and utterly destroyed. Those who are left, the land is going to be destroyed. And then you're going to be scattered and exiled throughout the world.
So being exiled, that's still part of the first?
They're all connected. But let's just focus one at a time. I think conquering and destroying is rare, but not that surprising. On the other hand, I would say ve'fitzcha, being scattered throughout the world, is extremely unlikely and extremely rare. I just mentioned that the Romans themselves generally did not destroy the places that they conquered. They would attack them, and then they would leave them and tax them. They wanted to get their tax base. And Jews and another city-state called Carthage happened to be the only ones that were burnt and destroyed and thrown away.
But exile, the Jewish people were exiled by the Romans?
Exactly. And now I want to talk about the central prophecy, which is that they're going to get scattered. They're going to be exiled throughout the world. The Torah predicts that there's going to be a nation that's going to come and scatter them and exile them throughout the world. Okay? Now, before we analyze that historically, did that actually happen? I want to first ask, is that likely? Let's ask ourselves, is that likely that there's going to be this Jewish nation is going to be, the Torah is going to predict, is going to be scattered throughout the world if you don't keep the Torah? Is going to be exiled and scattered throughout the world. So I'm seeing a no nod. Why not?
Well, one thing, people like to stick together. For another thing, even though the Romans, in this case, are taking us out of the land, they're still smart, and they know that this group, if they have in one or two places, they can be a productive nation. But if they're scattered, they'll lose their identity, or they would think they would lose their identity, and they would become nothing.
Yes,
So if they went to all the trouble to conquer us, maybe they can get...
Maybe make something out of us.
By putting some in Babylonia, or some in
Or just enslave us. Just make us the slave labor.
in Rome, and keep the people together, because it's profitable for them. And like I say, for us, why would we want to scatter? Because we want to be what we've known since we left Egypt, is being together, except for that one, well, the Babylonian was the only split, really, major split.
Right? So, okay. What's your name again? What's your name?
Uncle Gabriel.
Uncle Gabriel makes two excellent points. So first of all, let's stick with imagine you're a Jew that's getting kicked out of the land, okay? So maybe you guys have traveled a little bit. What's the first thing when you're a Jew and you're traveling somewhere where there's not so many Jews around? You usually want to find other Jews. That's just what happened. And where do you go? You go to Chabad, right? You go to somewhere to find other Jews because that's where we like being in our little tribes. We like huddling together. We're small, we're different, and therefore it would be very natural for us to not scatter. If we're going to be kicked out of Israel, we want to stay huddled together, find a place, wherever it is, and hang out there. Maybe there'll be 2 places, maybe 3 places, okay, but it would be exactly counterintuitive. We would never want to go all across the world. That would be the opposite of what would make sense to us, okay? Or again, we're just any nation. Why would you want to scatter all across the world? That seems to be lacking logic, okay? And in addition, like you said, it would be much more helpful for the nation to use their slave labor. Why would you want to scatter them throughout the whole world? Why would that happen, okay? So I think that's very logical. Of course, everyone's welcome to disagree. Yes?
I'm not disagreeing. I'm asking, were they scattered or they did scatter? In other words, was that a...
Well, from God's perspective, from the Torah's perspective, I have scattered you. But indeed, they scattered themselves, or as history happened, they got scattered. You know, the Jews didn't want to get scattered by the Spanish Inquisition or by the British, kicking them out or this and that. That's what happened, amazingly enough.
So you go right and you go left.
No, but history just worked out that way that we got scattered all throughout the world, which is very counter what we would have expected. Okay? Yeah?
And how is it that we are gathered together speaking English instead of, and alternatively, modern Hebrew instead of Lashon HaKodesh?
Right, exactly. And so we're going to get back to that at the end of the part 2 of this prophecy, which is even more unbelievable, is that we would come back to the land of Israel, and the amazing thing is that we are here somehow speaking English in the middle of Yerushalayim. So we are living this prophecy. We'll get back to that, but correct, absolutely. Yeah, but Daniel wants to say something, yeah?
Did the Romans exile Jewish people or not?
So you're skipping to the punchline, but indeed, historically speaking, that is what happened. That the Jewish people did get exiled by the Romans in the year 70,
No one was left in their throne?
I can't tell you there was 0, but there was very, very few Jews left. In
55% were...
99% were scattered out of Israel.
Which year?
In the year 70, okay? And the Ramban talks about this in his commentary, as does the Abarbanel, specifically linking our story, our Dvarim Chavches, to what we have Edus about from Josephus and other historical accounts about the Roman exile. So indeed, that's exactly what happened, that we ended up getting exiled, and we all know that we've ultimately been exiled throughout the whole world, just as the Torah predicted, despite the unlikelihood of that event. Yeah?
Not only that, it happened again and again. So it happened, the big one was Spain, but it also happened from the Central German nations were constantly expelling the Jews. England was constantly expelled, well, several important times expelled the Jews. So it happened again and again.
Right, so someone looking back at our history would have to be like, wow.
And it was the same cause. It was the Jews melding into the general population, and then Hashem saying, no, we need you to...
Right.
We don't need you to become a Spaniard. We need you to remain a Jew.
Absolutely. That's an absolutely true point. But again, I'm just trying to be very pointed, very scientific here. The Torah predicts A. What are the odds of A happening? The Torah predicts us being scattered. What are the odds of a nation scattering throughout the world? Which we're only up to that yet. And did it happen? We've already skipped to the point line that it did happen. But we're just stick with me with one more point to make it even more like unlikely. How many nations in the universe have been scattered throughout the world? Because if something is likely, if a skeptic wants to say, well, it could happen. I don't know, your nation, it could get scattered. So we would assume that would happen to many, many, many nations.
It can happen. I can name 2.
Okay.
The Greeks and the Chinese. You find them very scattered.
So, okay. So first of all,
but it's
no,
the small number The Chinese are big.
First of all, I'll make it clear. The Torah doesn't say we're going to be the only nation that ever gets scattered throughout the world. It doesn't ruin my argument if there's 2, 3, 4, I don't know how many other nations. It's still unlikely because after all, we have to remember how many nations were there throughout the history of time from the time of the ancient Hebrews 25 to 3,000 years ago until now. We're talking hundreds of nations, for at least, I don't know, maybe more, maybe thousands of nations. And how many of them got scattered throughout the world? Very few. And even those who were scattered, it's perhaps one could argue that they're not exactly the same. They've lost their culture. And so the Greeks of today perhaps are not exactly the same Greeks as then. The Egyptians of today are not the same Egyptians. Many talk about the Armenians. Perhaps Armenians are an example of a people that has gotten scattered throughout many places of the world, but that's a much more modern example. It was way after the Israelites. So there's very few, if any, and I don't really think there's any other nations that this has happened to, which again shows that this is extremely unlikely. If it was likely, we would assume it would happen to many other nations. The fact that it's happening to very, very few, if any, shows that this is a very unlikely prediction to have been made. Yeah, one second, and then we'll get back to you.
Not only that, but it's happened to us at least twice.
Right.
If you're focusing on the Roman, the Babylonian did the same thing. It took the
Correct. And many of the commentaries exactly point out that there was 2 different tochachas, as I pointed out, in Vayikra and in Dvarim, and they therefore try to connect that the Babylonian captivity connects to the first tochacha, and the Roman captivity connects to the second tochacha. Now, the wording of Dvarim is quite broad, and it also does connect to what Uncle Gabriel was saying, which is that I'm going to spread you, and that means all throughout the history of time. It didn't necessarily have to end at the Romans. All of the spreading out that just has happened throughout time is still part of that prediction. And when one looks back at Jewish history, it's just amazing that exactly as the covenant promised is what happened. Okay? Yeah, fair. Okay, so I think we've made it clear that the prediction was very, very unlikely. I don't know how to put a number on it. Is it 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in... But very, very unlikely, and yet it happened that we were scattered throughout the world, which I think a serious skeptic would have to ask himself, how is that? What is the likelihood of that happening? But that's only one example, and we're going to show Bezrat Hashem 10 different unlikely examples just in this Dvarim Chav Ches, which will make our case even stronger. But first, yes?
The other thing we have to focus on is the fact that most of these nations that were mentioned just now, still, they existed throughout this whole time. We're talking about Greece and China, places that still exist, that existed when a lot of Chinese and Greeks were scattered, and other people too. Carthage might be the only one that was completely wiped out. Right. But we are the ones. The crazy miracle of this, really, is that even more than coming back here, right now it looks like we're going to explode and disappear. But I don't think that's going to happen because God promised us something else, and that's why.
Okay, beautiful.
But the ultimate miracle is that we reunited after that.
Absolutely. You're right, guys, and we're going to get to that prediction too. But I want to put out there the things that I'm saying, in particular in this year, are things that we've all heard before. They're not. It's not a big chiddush that we've heard the miracle of Jewish survival and the miracle of Jewish history, etc. What I'm trying to do is look at it more like a scientist, look at it more like a statistician. That's the chiddush of this particular shir, is to really go methodologically, prediction by prediction by prediction by prediction by prediction, and really stop. And not just in like a wow shear that you're going to get, wow, like you say at the Shabbos table, the Jewish people have always existed. And then, the guy at the end of the table would just roll their eyes and be like, okay, very nice. He's just very inspired. But really, like, pointed arguments that you could make to the skeptics within ourselves of literally percentage-wise, what are the odds of a nation being scattered? Well, it's never happened in any other case. And why would that be? And how did the author of the Torah have that foreknowledge? Okay, and we're gonna get also to many of the arguments that you guys are bringing up now, slowly. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, let's move on. The next pasuk. Well, it's not the next pasuk, but it's in that same prophecy. The Torah says, "Yisa Hashem lakecha goy merachok." So there's going to be a nation that's going to come from afar. Mikseh haaretz kasher yid'eh hanasher. It's going to come from the farthest place of the land, like a nesher, usually translated like an eagle. Goy asher lo tishma leshono. A nation that you don't understand its language. And this is the language which is going to exile you and wreak all of this havoc. A nation that you don't understand its language, a nation that's going to come from very far. Okay? So let's ask the first question, which is that likely that that's going to happen? That the nation that's going to cause all the havoc is going to come from far away, and you're not going to understand the language that they speak? The answer is, not necessarily. There's other options of how a nation that could come and exile you. For example, the nation could be close. It could be a next door neighbor nation. And it could also be a nation that you understand the language, that the Israelites would understand their language. For example, if the Greeks would have came and been the ones to exile the Jews, this prophecy would not have been fulfilled, because the Jews understood the language of the Greeks. If it would have been a nation that would have been very close, then that prophecy would not have been fulfilled. If it would have been any nation that the Jews would have known the idols that they worshipped in this language, this prophecy would not have been fulfilled. However, in reality, we know historically what is the nation that actually ended up scattering the Jewish people. The primary one that we've been focusing on happens to be the Romans. The Romans happen to have come from a faraway land, a land that the Jews did not recognize. They happen to have spoken Latin, that the Jews did not speak that language. And to make it, I think this is even crazier, what was the national symbol of the Romans? What were their war symbols that they would hold?
Eagles?
Eagles. They held poles with eagles on it. Which is unbelievable that the author of the Torah embeds that in the prophecy way before the Romans, way before anyone knew anything about the Romans, that somehow he's putting in a Bible code alluding to this random nation that's going to end up wreaking such havoc. Yes?
Jews understand Greek?
Many Jews at that Second Temple time did understand Greek because it was like the English of that time period. It was the national language the international language that many nations spoke, and so it wasn't so confused. Many of them knew a bit of Greek or a lot of Greek. The Gemara talks about how you could translate to Greek, but that's a little bit different time period. But it's known that Greek was a known language, as opposed to Latin, which was not at the time. Okay? So I'm not going to tell you that this is a 1 in 1,000 type of thing, but it's pretty crazy that it happens to be exactly the nations that was far away, that they didn't speak the language, that has the eagle symbol, which I think that is just unbelievable, happened to be the nation that wreaked the havoc. Okay? Yep. Questions, comments? We're good? Beautiful. Let's keep going. And then this is a little sad. V'achalta pri vitnecha, besar banecha, uvnotecha, asher natan lecha Hashem Elokecha b'matzor matok asher yatik lecha oivecha. And mothers will eat the children, the flesh of their children, and etc., etc. So it's going to be such a time of starvation that the Torah predicts that there's going to be these terrible things going on. So again, is this impossible? I don't think this is impossible. I think there were probably a lot of terrible situations throughout the history of man, so the author of the Torah could have predicted such a thing. In fact, we know during the Babylonian captivity this is also going on, this type of thing. But is it likely? Meaning, if you're making a bet in Vegas, is it going to be the type of siege and mothers are going to be eating the children of their flesh? Not necessarily. Why would I guess that that's exactly the siege that's going to happen? And yet we know, Josephus recounts and other historians recount, that that's exactly the type of starvation that was happening during this time period, during this exact time period that the Torah is describing during the Roman captivity. Again, it happened to the Babylonians, but again, just added to the, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, what are the odds, 1 in 10, that that's going to happen, and yet that's exactly what happened. You with me? Let's keep going. And this, we're going to get a little bit more hopeful. I want to get something happier. We need more happiness in our lives during this time period. But in the end of the day, Ve'ishivcha Hashem mimitzrayim ba'anios b'derech asher amarti lecha lo tosiv od lirota v'itmakartem sham lo yivecha la'avadim l'shpachot en koneh. Sorry, I was wrong. We're not up to the happy part yet. My bad. And God's going to bring you back to Egypt. Whatever nation is going to take you, they're going to take you down to Egypt in boats. And you're going to go back to Egypt. And you're going to be sold to your enemies as slaves. But you're going to be so not worth anything, that no one's going to buy you. You're going to be sold as slaves and no one's going to buy you. That's what the Torah predicts is going to happen to this Jewish people eventually. What do you guys think? Is this a likely prediction that you're going to be sold as slaves and there's going to be so many slaves that no one's going to be buying you and you're going to get sold down to Egypt?
Like Palestinians.
Well, okay, so I don't want to get into politics right now, but yeah. So again, just think about it. I'm a secular historian. I'm trying to explain that he just made a prediction, a general type of prediction, and it happened to have happened. Why would the author of the Torah go out on a limb and say that the Jews are going to be sold into slavery and sold back to Egypt? I mean, that's a pretty unlikely thing to happen. And we happen to be taken as slaves, and they sell them to Egypt of all places, and there's so many of them that no one's going to buy them. I mean, I don't know, 1 in 20, 1 in 50. What are the odds that that's going to happen? And yet we know that Josephus and other historians exactly recount that that's exactly what happened during the Roman exile. And we have kinos about such a thing. And we take it for granted. Yeah, it was just another sad thing that happened like the Torah predicted. But if we take a step back and say, wow, that's a pretty random prediction. And that's exactly what happened.
Egyptian slaves.
Yeah, we were sold as slaves, sold back to Egypt, but no one wanted to buy us because there were so many slaves. That exact story is recounted by Josephus, just as the Torah predicted thousands or hundreds of years prior.
And how many percent of the Jewish people was sold slaves?
It's a good question. We don't have an answer exactly.
What do we know?
We know that secular sources indicate a very large percentage of the Jewish people were sold into slavery. Some of them were bought back by their Jewish brothers in Rome. And eventually, many of them became free men. We know that at some point in history, the Jews were about 10% of Roman society around that time period. So a tremendous amount of Rome was Jewish. They were originally slaves. Some of them stayed as slaves, but many of them eventually gained freedom by their brothers redeeming them. But yes, this is a known historical fact. Okay, just as the Torah predicted hundreds of years earlier. Got it? Clear? Okay, beautiful. So we're still just, again, we're lawyers right now. We're in the courtroom case. I could just give you one piece of evidence, which is, we found the gun of the murderer in his house, but I want to bring a lot of evidence. I want the gun and the DNA and then this, and I want to bring as strong of a case as possible of unlikely things, some more unlikely, some likely, to really nail down the case of what are the odds. Okay? Next source, we're in source Zayin, if you want to follow along. Vinish'artem bimtei ma'at. And yet, during this exile, you will remain bimtei ma'at, very small. You're going to remain a very small people. Ta'achat asher yitem k'chochvei shemaim l'rov ki lo shamat b'kol Hashem Elokecha. Even though you were like the stars of the heaven, you didn't listen to God. There's different ways to translate this verse, but what's clear about the verse is that you will always remain a small nation. Jewish people are going to remain small. Okay? Now, again, before we jump to did this happen, what are the odds? What are the odds that we're going to have a nation that at the time of the Torah is, a sizable amount? They're going to survive, clearly, from the prediction. And yet, they're always going to remain small. Meaning, why would that necessarily happen?
Well, wasn't it predicted that would be like the stars in the heaven?
On the one hand, we're predicted in this passage we're going to be like the stars in the heaven. At the same time, we're predicted that we're going to be small. So we have to understand in what way are we also like stars, maybe in our impact, as we're going to get to the Or Lagoyim type of thing. But in our numbers, percentage-wise, compared to other people, we're going to remain small. Okay? And I'm asking, why would that be? Why would we assume that this nation is going to continue to be small? Right?
There's no reason to assume that, and there are people, demographers, who believe that at one point there were as many Chinese as Jews.
Correct. Exactly. I wanted to point that out. I had a chart, but I left it at home. I'll bring it next time to show that around 200 BCE, the Jews and the Chinese and the Jews had approximately the same amount of people, and yet compare us to them now. You know? Yeah, there's no comparison. There's, I don't know how many, a billion. There's a lot of Chinese people. God bless them. And how many Jews are there? What, 17 million? 16 million? You know, it depends how you count it. We've always been just on the survival, you know? And if you look at our numbers, we should be in the tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, for sure.
At least a billion.
At least a billion. Again, I'm not a demographer. I can't tell you exact numbers, but, you know, there's no logical reason to assume a nation that has that's been around for such a long time. It was significant. I told you guys we were 10% of the Roman Empire. We were a significant amount of people, and yet we've always remained a small nation. Why would that be? What are the odds, and why would that happen? And yet, amazingly enough, that's exactly what happened. We've always remained the smallest of the nations on a number level until this day. Fortunately, we know why that is. We know why because God's will, but the other reason is because of persecution and anti-Semitism and pogroms and Holocaust and assimilation and many other reasons. But again, it's astounding. The author of the Torah is standing here and says, you're going to survive, you're always going to be the small nations. That's very unlikely. There's no other nation and yet that's exactly what happened, that we always remain.
There might be hundreds of millions if you account for the sacred Jews.
Exactly. Oh, you're saying there might be hundreds of millions of people who are connected to Judaism at some point. Correct. If you want to connect anyone who's physically been connected to Judaism and all the lost tribes and all of the Arabs in Yatta who, you know, were at some point connected to Jewish tradition. Yeah. Millions and billions. But in terms of actual Jews, halachic Jews, people who practice what we consider Judaism, we've always, and we still are, a very, very small percentage, just as the Torah predicts here and in other places. And again, what are the odds? That's a pretty crazy stat. That's a pretty crazy percentage. Yeah? Okay. I think we're getting the point, but I'll just we're just going to keep driving it home. As the Torah says, this is in Devarim, it points this out. You'll be the smallest of all the nations, and I still love you. Dafka, because or despite the fact that you're small, still you are my beloved nation, and I brought that Chinese stat on the source sheet too. Okay, but now we're getting to happier times. With all that sad stuff and all those unlikely things that have happened, in the end, the Torah has some happy news. After all these things, and I will return you to Hashem your God, and you will listen to his voice. When you return to God with all your heart and all your soul, and God will bring back those who have been in exile and have mercy upon you. And I'm going to gather you from all the nations which God has scattered you. And he goes and says, even if you're scattered throughout all the world, God is going to bring you back. And I'm going to bring you back to the Holy Land. Okay, so again, what's the game we play? What are the odds? What are the odds that there's going to be a nation that is going to be scattered throughout all of the universe, and yet someday will find its way back to that original land, which will somehow still be available for them to come back?
That'll never happen.
What, you got it. If you were the wildest gambler in Vegas, you would never make that bet. And how do I know that that's a very, very unlikely situation? It's never happened. It's never happened in the history of the world and a nation that got scattered throughout the entire universe. Or if it never is, very, very unlikely that it's happened.
Well, Napoleon.
Okay, right. So we'll get to all the quotes in a minute. But I just want to establish the unlikelihood is meted out by the historical fact that no other nation has been scattered throughout the universe and then come back. Because, again, that's very, very hard to do. How do you coordinate that you're gonna get scattered throughout the whole world and then come back. If it was so easy to do, some other nation should have been able to do that. Again, what if other nations took that land? What if it's not available anymore? How do you get everyone organized and bring them back to the land? And yet we're all super aware that that's exactly what happened historically, just as the Torah predicted. Yeah?
Must say this prediction is like also before says the Shavta and Hashem Elokecha. You cannot say now the Jewish people are more observant than before the Holocaust. For that, it's not really like, cannot say that's really.
Oh, so Daniel brings out a good point. If we want to connect this prophecy to the fact that we are sitting here in this room today and the Jewish people have returned back to their land, so then how do you make that work with the fact that have we really Vishav Hashem Elokecha? Have we really come back to God? So I think there's two answers to that question.
The Zionists who created the state were actually anti-religious.
So I would say, but first of all, we could recognize that this prophecy is in the process of being fulfilled. Meaning it may not have yet been completely fulfilled. We're not all here. A large percentage are here, 49.99% or whatever, but not everybody. So it could be that that aspect of the prophecy of Vishav Hashem Elokecha is yet to happen, of the Jewish people doing this tshuva, but we're in the process of that happening, and we can see in front of our eyes that prophecy is in the process of happening. You can give another answer, an answer that I like better, which is that I don't agree with your assessment. I think if we read the pasuk very simply, and you will return to Hashem Elokecha, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that all the Jewish people have done tshuva, but that there will be a massive returning to God, and it is unquestionable that there has been a massive tshuva movement that we are experiencing specifically in the time of coming of the kibbutz galuyot, of the Jewish people coming back to their land. It's true, it's not 100%, it's not the whole people, and absolutely, but does the verse, and you will return to God, seem to have at least been partially fulfilled? Absolutely. And I think it's amazing that the alignment between the tshuva movement and the returning to the land of Israel seem to flow so well together.
Would you not say that it's like there is reward? First, you should come back, you will come back to Hashem, and then you will come back to the land.
Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps you could argue that if we just read this verse, it would seem like first there would be the full return to God, and then there would be the full returning of the land to Israel. But again, it doesn't mean that we're not in the middle of that process. That it could, I think we would all agree that we're not 100% there spiritually, and we're also not 100% there physically. But it's pretty amazing that we have come back to a certain extent physically and spiritually. We have come back to a great extent. Putting all politics aside and Zion, I don't think that's what we're not really discussing that. That's not what's relevant today. What's relevant is the prophecy that was predicted seeming to be fulfilled. And to me, it's never happened to any other nation that they were scattered throughout the world and 50% of them are back. And yet that's exactly what happened here. And that to me is unbelievable and a strong proof of the divinity of Hashem. I could argue a little bit of a counter, if I'm being intellectually honest, I could argue a little bit of an argument on my argument.
You would not say this is like grammatically that there was an order here? It doesn't need to be order? Just grammatically, just like, not like before shit.
And look, we'd also have to look at all the other times when it predicts that Hashem will return the Jews back to Israel and see if it's specifically linked to the spiritual awakening. I mean, this is not the only time in the Torah or in the prophets when Hashem predicts that the Jewish people are going to come back to their land. So it's hard to learn it. That deserves a real sheer in of itself of whether the spiritual returning back to the land of Israel needs to be the first step before the physical coming back to the land of Israel. And we would need to see the whole context, including those psukim, including the Gemara in Megillah, which talks about the Shemona Esrei as the steps of the redemption. And it's a fantastic topic, a topic that I'd love to learn with you about at some point. But it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing here. I don't think if we read the verse,
I think if you read the text, someone would have written the book, if it will not be Hashem, then scientifically, this like, is it like?
Okay, I hear the question. Again, the verse says, and you will return to the Lord Almighty, and you will come back to the land of Israel. And again, there has been a tremendous tshuva movement and a tremendous percentage of Jews who have returned to the Lord Almighty, whatever that means. And there has been a tremendous return after that. There has been a tremendous return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So even just looking at these verses, very simply, not getting too complicated, one could argue that has been fulfilled. True, not completely, not perfectly, but still in a tremendous type of way, an unexpected. Even in order, even in the order. First, I don't know but even in order, we've seen that order that since the '60s and the Tshuva movement, there has been a tremendous returning of Jews to the land of Israel, and correct. And in terms of our sovereignty over the land of Israel, there was a returning physically to the land of Israel to a greater extent after the tshuva. And maybe it's a good argument that the more tshuva we do, the more we will come back to the land of Israel. Actually, the more of a Shemesh, who I'm related to, a Hasidic Rebbe, argues exactly that. That the returning of the Jews to the land of Israel and the returning of the Jews physically to the land of Israel are intertwined, and one leads to the next. But again, it's a little bit of a different fascinating topic, but yeah, okay. So, just to summarize, okay, put it all together. We made a bunch of predictions. I wrote it out. We predicted, this woman said, this Torah told us, you're going to get exiled. And the truth is, there's 2 exile stories. And you're going to get scattered throughout the world. Okay? Neither of those were intuitive. Both of those are quite unlikely. And it's going to happen, this exiling, by a faraway nation. Also not intuitive. In a language that the Israelites did not know. Whose symbol was the eagle. There's going to be complete starvation. You're going to be sold as Egyptian slaves. And no one's going to want to buy you. You're going to remain the smallest nation. And yet, you're going to one day return back to your ancient homeland. I think each one of these is unlikely. Some of them 1 in 3, some of them 1 in 50. But the way it works in statistics is we multiply each one by the next. Okay? Because what are the odds that every single time the dice is gonna the exact same one? So I'm not a statistician. I don't claim to be. But I think it would be 1 in millions. It would be very, very, very unlikely that all of these predictions would happen to be predicted, and yet, voila. Okay, maybe you could argue with 1 or 2 of them here and there. You could, this one doesn't, I'm not sold on it, but you're putting it all together. It's just in this one chapter in the Torah, okay? We've already seen so many unbelievable things which have come out, and I've never seen, and I would be very hard pressed to hear, I'd be curious actually to hear a skeptic, how he would respond on a just scientific level to how did that actually end up happening? How could that be? It seems to me to be a relatively strong argument as to the author of this Torah having some sort of divine foreknowledge. Okay, now just because he has divine foreknowledge doesn't necessarily mean, that everything he says is true, but it's a strong indication. I would take it seriously. In other words, going back to Our Lady, I would read the book. If she made all these predictions and she claims to have a lot of secrets and she knew exactly that my coffee would spill on me and the red bicyclers and this and that, and she seems to be a very knowledgeable woman, so I would go back to her and ask her for some advice, and I would read her book. Why not? And it seems like she knows what she's talking about. So I would be in communion with this woman. So I think the argument can be made that these predictions really seem to indicate that the author of the Torah knew what he was talking about and knew how to make these strong predictions. Okay, I see we have a little bit more time, so we'll do 5 more minutes. Is that good? Yeah, we're happy because I'm still there in the source sheet. But we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna finish it off. Yeah.
I got a question.
Sure.
It seems like God is reminding us of the Romans yet again now.
Mm.
Because English was although English was implanted in the land um, before we became a state again, but it was the British. Now we have the nation whose symbol is the eagle, and
Interesting.
who dictates every last little thing to us. And I think we know who that is.
Very fascinating. Yeah, listen, this year is Kilo building proof of Judaism, but the truth is, for those of us who are already in, who believe, then there's a lot more to be analyzed about what is the deeper meaning behind these prophecies, and what do they have to teach us today, and not just their relevance back in the Roman era, but even today, what are we supposed to learn from the Tochacha, etc. And there's a lot to be fleshed out there. Absolutely. But yeah, no, okay, we're good. Okay, implicit in all these predictions is another prediction that you guys have all alluded to already, which is the survival of the Jewish nation. In other words, if you're going to be scattered throughout the world and then come back, so you can't do that if you're dead, okay? You have to survive in order to be, for all these predictions to come across.
And the survival mechanism is the source of the predictions, the Torah itself.
Right, exactly, which is also amazing. As the Torah says, it's chayim hi, that this is the source of your life. And it says it even more explicitly many times. Netzach Yisrael, lo chilitem, I'm never going to extinguish you, etc., etc., etc. And again, the fact that we are here, the fact that we survive, statistically, is very unlikely. And the simplest way to explain that is, where are the Hittites? Where are the Midianites? Where are the Amorites? Where are all those Canaanites? And just open up the Bible and ask where those Girgash, like, just go through the, I don't know, dozens that we could just see in the Bible itself, the Philistines, and then go on Wikipedia and look for all the nations that we could find in the ancient Near East thousands of years ago, and ask, where'd they go? They're gone. Because most nations, what happens to most nations? They assimilate. Either they get completely vanquished, that's kind of hard to kill every single last one of them. So usually what happens to nations, they become part of other cultures. They become part of other nations, they assimilate, and that's what gets rid of them. That's often what happens with nations. Sometimes you do have nations which survive, right? Like the Egyptians and the Greeks and etc. But they're not really the same nations. They're not really the same culture. They just have the same name. But the Egyptian of today and the Egyptian of 3,000 years ago, there's not that much that links them. Obviously, this is a bit subjective. How do you define a nation? But it's clear to us that we Jews and the Jews 3,000 years ago have a strong, we believe we're the same nation. We're praying for the same things. We think about the same things. Yeah, I ate kugel and cholent and you had chamin, but we're the same nation and we have many of the same laws. But that's not true for many of these nations that are still here. And so the fact that the Jewish people survived and has the same culture as the Jewish people 3,000 years ago is extremely, extremely unlikely. There have been very few, if any, other nations that have survived that long. And yet, here we are. And I think that can be added to the unlikely prediction that has somehow been fulfilled. And this one, we're all familiar with the nice quotes. I brought down King Louis, right, the French king, who was he went to an Aish seminar. He wanted to believe in God. So he went to the Bible codes, he didn't buy it. He went to my shir, he didn't like it. But he went to Blaise Pascal, Pascal's wager, and he said, give me proof of God. Proof to me God. And Pascal answered, the Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews. Which again, sounds like a very fluffy, nice thing to say if you just go to a Dvar Torah. You yourself are the proof of God. But when you think about it analytically, scientifically, we really are. The fact that we have survived, we are edus to the veracity, to the truth of Hashem, because he predicted we would survive, and the likelihood of that happening is very, very small. It's true that you could try to explain it and say, well, maybe the Jews, they're the type of people that just never can get erased. Maybe we have the Torah, and okay, you could always come up with an argument of how we survived and how nobody else survived. But at the end of the day, if you put all of the arguments together, it seems very, very unlikely that they would all be fulfilled in that same respect. On a sadder note, in the Tochacha, The Torah tells us, and basically these nations are never going to let you rest. You're always going to be persecuted throughout the generations. And this is actually reiterated many times throughout the bad predictions of the Torah. Has that been fulfilled, that the Jewish people have always been persecuted? Unfortunately, that very much so, more than any other nation in the history of the world. Even nowadays, even in our generation, when everyone thought we were done with anti-Semitism, that was like so 100 years ago, and somehow it's coming back even in our generation. And obviously there's a message from Hashem there too. But as hard as that is to swallow, we know that is the prediction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a little bit of a proof of Hashem, because he says there's always going to be anti-Semitism, and despite the fact that most people assimilate when there's anti-Semitism, when there's racism, they assimilate. We just get even stronger and get more connected to our people when there's those who fight against us, and we continue to go strong. So we'll add that to the list of very unlikely things, and yet if you look at our history, how can you deny that that's exactly what's been happening in our history? So Bezrat Hashem, next week, just to give a preview, we're going to talk about the predictions of the Jewish people being light unto the nations, the Torah never being forgotten, the land not being desolate, and some lesser known predictions in the Gemara and in the Kabbalah, which I also think are quite astounding and amazing. And Bezrat Hashem, that's the plan to finish this segment about unlikely predictions that have been fulfilled. Shkayach, guys. Thanks for